Welcome to Building Forward, a podcast about developer experience, community, and meetups. My name is Christina Martinez, and I'm joined by Chris Pennington, the other member of the developer experience team at Resend. This year, we're building Resend Forward, our very first tech conference, and we want to take this opportunity to learn together in public about crafting the best in-person experiences. We're joined today by Carter Rabasa, the organizer of Cascadia JS, a well-loved developer conference that takes place in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. I'm from Washington State, and I had the absolute pleasure of going to Cascadia JS last year, and it was such a special event that reflected the culture of the region so well. So we're super excited to have you on here to pick your brain, Carter.
Yeah, for sure. If you ask people who know me, there's very few things I like to talk about more than Cascadia JS. It's just super fun. I'm excited to be here. Right, and look, I wish there were more of these in the world, right? So I'm happy to, anything that I might know, I'm happy to share it because the world needs a lot more fun conferences that are kind of built for developers.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So would you tell us a little bit more about you and what you do and what Cascadia is all about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm Carter. Hello. I lead developer relations at a company called Box. And when I'm not, I guess on nights and weekends, I help to run Cascadia JS. It's a sort of a labor of love. Started it back in 2012, and we've just been chugging along for 14 years now. And the most recent one just wrapped up in early June of this year.
Yeah, we were so bummed not to make it. We actually both came last time to Cascadia, and so I've been to the Pacific Northwest some, but I'm not from there. And so it was really special to get to share that and then kind of get all the vibes from there. I'm curious how it came about, because at this point, it was such a big conference. I was surprised by how many hundreds of people were there, and yet it felt so intimate and personal. And that is obviously intentional. Something has crafted that. Do you mind chatting through how it came about? I know you said it's a labor of love and you've been at it for some time, but I'm curious what brought the conference about in the first place.
I mean, I've told the story a few times, and I'm happy to tell it again, right? I mean, the Cascadia JS wouldn't exist if it wasn't for JSConf and a guy named Chris Williams. So, people can Google JSConf and Chris Williams, and they'll find out that there was this conference that was started back in 2008 by Chris, a web developer that lived in Virginia. And, he had a vision for a conference that was by devs for devs. And I mean, I'm aging myself, but if you go back into the distant past, professional technical conferences were not run by practitioners. They were run by professional events people, and they were sort of optimized for charging you way too much and giving you bad coffee, right? It was they were operated like very voracious businesses. And yeah, Chris just had a vision for something that was different and wasn't about making as much money as possible. So I was lucky enough when I used to work at Microsoft, which is why I live in Seattle right now. We sponsored JSConf 2011, I believe, which was in Portland, Oregon. So that was my first experience at this event called JSConf, and I just couldn't believe how amazing it was, and I couldn't believe all the wonderful people it attracted. And then at the time, I was helping to organize the Seattle JS meetup, and I just went back home to Seattle and told everybody about this miraculous thing called JSConf, and we started to sort of really get frustrated and upset that because JSConf was in Portland, and we're and which is not bad, but it was I think the next year was going to be in Florida. And we were all sort of why? What's happening? Why would we have to get on a plane and fly to Florida to attend a really great conference for web developers? And then just all of that sort of frustration converted itself into momentum. And we ended up putting on the first Cascadia JS in the fall of 2012.
We've discovered that setting a philosophy and sticking to it is super important when you're producing such a high quality event. So what kind of philosophy have you chosen for Cascadia, and what anti-patterns, anti-goals have you rejected as not being central to the mission?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of what I just said, right? I mean, the guiding principle, and this is very durable over time, right, is that Cascadia is by devs for devs. The for devs thing is kind of obvious. It's like, okay, sure, it's for devs, right? Like we want them to buy tickets and we want them to come. I think the by devs is the hard part because developers, event organization is not something you learn when you're studying computer science, right? So people might actually think that's super unreasonable. That would be like, I don't know, a professional soccer league like run by soccer players or something. But I think I've learned the hard way that the best developer meetups are run by developers. And the best developer conferences are run by developers. And it just turns out that all of the skills that you need to put on a really great event, like you can acquire those skills. And when you marry that event organization like capability with all of the knowledge and empathy that you have for like the target customer, like for the target attendee, you just end up with like a better event. So for us, that's super important, right? Like, we have like, we organize talk committees that like help think about like who to invite or who to select from the CFP. We work like it's developers and volunteers in our community that we work with to figure out like, well, what are the activities going to be? And like, what would be fun? Like every aspect of the people that help make Cascadia JS happen, like they're all developers, which means that like we don't have to talk to we don't have to create focus groups to like learn what developers care about. Like we are devs, and I just think that's the sort of the overriding like philosophy that we have, and it's been really durable, and it's worked for us all these years.
I feel like that cuts out so much trash you normally see. Like sometimes at events where you're like, okay, some marketing person got in here, and started messing with this, or somebody clearly is caring about shareholder value. And like, I think that's one thing that when we came to Cascadia just overwhelmed me. Like these people get me, and it makes sense that that's core to the philosophy. I mean, that comes through so naturally, and it's not put on, it's not fake, it's not false. And so that kind of guiding light is super evident as an attendee. And yeah, I was really bummed to miss it this year.
Well, don't worry, Chris. It's coming back next year. So just go to
there we go.
CascadiaJS.com. Blind bird tickets are on sale now. So we'll see you next year.
Okay. There we go. So you mentioned those are skills that you can acquire as a developer. So how was it just practice for you of starting these meetups and things? How did you acquire those skills?
Yeah, totally. Like the way you acquire any skill, right? How do you learn to program? Like you write your first hello world, right? I think you can practice by don't worry about running a meetup. Be a volunteer, right? I guarantee you every meetup in whatever city or community you live in would kill for you to like email them cold and be like, hey, I'd really like to help. How can I volunteer? Cascadia JS, like people volunteer every year at Cascadia JS. Like we have a core group of organizers that are there year after year, but every year we have, we just sort of have the capacity to take on new people, and through their act of service, like they get to kind of see how it works and like learn the ropes. The greatest compliment to me is that people would sort of like participate in the behind the scenes for Cascadia JS, and then like if their career or their lives take them to another city or place, I would hope that they'd create their own, because like I said, I think the world needs more events like this. But yeah, I think meetups are the best possible training wheel to get started, because then you can level up. I forget exactly what year it was, but one year we did this thing called Super Seattle JS, which was basically a one-day conference. And it was like training wheels. Like I don't even remember if we sold tickets or not, but we went through the motions of like creating a full day of content, having speakers, like people, whether they paid or not, they were going to have to take a day off of work, right? Like there are ways that you can kind of create midpoints in between nothing and a conference, and you just sort of like learn as you go. And the first Cascadia JS was not necessarily much more than a meetup. I think we barely touched 200 total people. So that in the Bay Area, like that would just be considered like a Thursday at a meetup. So but that's how it was. And then just you grow over time. You make it more you add complexity to it. You kind of like you build. It's like a product, right? And by the way, like that, my background is in engineering and in product management. Like I don't think of Cascadia JS any differently than I would think of a product. Like I think about how it's designed, I think about who its users are, I think about how you launch it. It's like, it's a product, right? And it's a product that people pay for. So, all of those things that you are learning about creating products that people love, like you can channel a lot of those tools and expertise into creating a great event.
I feel like we've tried to do little meetups along the way the last year in preparation. So that's encouraging to hear that, like, that's a good training ground. And I find myself like as we go through these, we're trying to be critical of like, what can we make better? What can we do better without being critical as people? And I think one of the things I really appreciate about Cascadia is there's such a warm and like welcoming environment. And you do a lot to make sure that you care about accessibility and inclusion. And I'm curious around like that. How did you grow into that? Was that something that was important from the beginning? Was that through making mistakes where you realized, oh, we weren't considering others? I'm just curious how to foster the kind of environment that you all have that's so welcoming and encouraging to everyone.
We have a code of conduct that applies to everybody, including organizers and including sponsors, and include every human being that's on site has to abide by our code of conduct. Like I myself, like I have inadvertently and accidentally violated our own code of conduct. I literally had someone like report me for this. And I'm sharing this story because like, I made an inadvertent mistake. But like we had created such a safe space, safe community that like there was no problem with someone coming and telling me like, hey, I have to talk to you about something. So I think that you need to walk the talk, right? And you have to create a set of fellow organizers who feel like you will listen to them and who are aligned on like what your values are. And as someone who is like, in theory, I run Cascadia JS. Like that is not how I think about it. I think about like, I'm sort of the person who helps people do amazing things at Cascadia JS. Like I try to unblock people. I try to empower people. If I've made a mistake, I hope that they tell me so that we can fix it. So I think culturally, like that's, and if the things I'm saying maybe sound like how you imagine like a really healthy startup or company operating, it's intentional, right? Like these are just, I'm not saying things that are specific to like running a conference. I'm saying things that are specific to like just running like an organization or like running a good company. Another thing is, yeah, like you have to, you will never get it. I mean, you and everyone listening, you're never going to get it right the first time, and you shouldn't beat yourself up over it. We had a speaker not even that long ago. I mean, like 6-7 years ago, who had a disability. We were totally aware of it. Like everybody was aware of it, but like we weren't thinking it through, and we didn't realize that he would need to be seated for his talk on the stage that we had constructed. I mean, every other speaker was just going to stand, right? And we just missed it, right? And we acted with haste and we corrected it in real time, but we had to internalize that failure. And now we have a more robust speaker onboarding form that where we like explicitly ask them to flag if they need additional assistance. So I guess like my TLDR is like, you're not going to get everything right at first, but like so long as you're open to feedback and you're willing to incorporate that moving forward, like you're good, right? People care more about like your sort of your culture and your intentions, right? Because there's just a recognition that nobody's perfect, but people can tell like where you're coming from and what your intentions are.
That's great. And you were just talking about organizing this conference as almost like a company or organization, but it's also a bit of a family affair for you. Your wife, Carrie, co-organizes it from what I hear. And I think you also mentioned having your kids help out in various aspects.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to run a conference as a whole family unit?
No, totally. I wish I had some like photos staged that I could share with you right now. But like my kids have been like coming. So I'm not exaggerating. Like my kids are 14 and 16 right now. So if you do the math on that, they were like 0 and 2, like when the first Cascadia JS happened, and I have photos of them joining me on stage. Yeah, I mean, like we run Cascadia JS like a small family business. Carrie is our, like sort of chief design officer, chief operating officer. Everything that you like look at and see and touch at Cascadia is sort of a thoughtful decision that Carrie has made, and she does a ton of like the very thankless work behind the scenes to make sure that like speakers have what they need and that sponsors have what they need. No, it's awesome. And then like as a parent who has kids that have grown up with the conference over time, we've created more and more opportunities for them to plug in. So like this past year, my son Quinn, who's 16, he's a voracious artist and animator. So he like handcrafted these interstitial like sort of we're going to break, we'll be back soon animations that would play like just before like the upcoming coffee break or lunch break or something. I remember like one year, like Emily spearheaded a bunch of our kind of like merch sales at like one of the events, and these are skills she picked up from Girl Scouts. So she kind of channeled all of her Girl Scout cooking skills into, selling Cascadia JS merch. Cascadia is like a small family business, right? And, and like people pay to go. And so we have customers, and like, I'm a very entrepreneurial person. Like I've been running little side businesses ever since I was 16 years old. So it's special for me to like teach the kids the joy of like creating something that people love and appreciate and are willing to pay for. And it's like fun for them because they get a kick of seeing their dad on stage, and it's been a really great experience. Like I will be personally sad when they have kind of outgrown Cascadia JS, and they're kind of like, because I don't think they're going to be like coming back on stage when they're like 28 years old or something. So it was sort of
you never know, maybe they take over from you and pass the baton.
Maybe. I think it's funny, I've broached that with them. They've sort of smiled and laughed a little bit, but I think they have their own ideas. But I respect that.
It's a great resume building, skills of, I did these animations for Cascadia JS, and they can take that to another job or whatever.
Yeah, they're building their portfolio, so it's all good.
Yeah, and it literally feels like a family, because at the end you take this big family photo with everyone as like the closing part, which was such a cool little wrap up, and I fit the spirit of the conference so well. Obviously, like right now, the world's changing and has been for some. It's changed, with AI entering the space and really becoming the dominant way that developers are developing right now. You describe Cascadia JS as the web and AI conference. And I'm curious, like, how you're both like keeping content fresh and relevant, especially with things changing so much.
If there's anyone at Cascadia JS that's like most responsible for the speaker lineup, it's me, right? Like we work with a bunch of people to kind of run through a vetting process, but ultimately, like, I make the calls, and I think it's my fundamental job to kind of like craft the best possible lineup that meets the moment, right? That sort of takes the people who have expressed interest in like being and speaking at Cascadia JS with the things that that we are hearing and we are seeing developers needing to deal with and contend with. So yeah, there's push and there's pull. Like we have a public CFP that like I deeply and greatly like encourage people to submit to. We marry that with just direct invitations to certain people based on usually just like what they're working on and our feeling that like this is something that developers like that's important to our community, and like we really need them to come join us at Cascadia and like help share their knowledge with our attendees. We try to group thematically like sessions together because we have a diverse community that joins us, right? Like we have people all the way up at the front end and people all the way back at the back end and like a bunch of full stack people in the middle. And there could be a cluster of talks that are very front-end oriented that certain attendees are just like, I'm not interested in those talks. Like I'm going to go down and talk to some of the exhibitors in the expo hall, or I'm just going to go catch up with some of my friends, and vice versa, right? So like we try to kind of thematically group and cluster the talks so that the people who are attending, who are buying the tickets, can kind of self-select in or out of these clusters over the course of 2 days. Because that's another thing. When people maybe, don't realize, like, people are not going to sit in a seat for like 2 consecutive days, like just consuming talks, right? Like it's our like our community, once again, is pretty heterogeneous. Like we need to have something for everybody. But each individual person will probably only watch at most like 25% of the talks that we have. So then as a group of people organizing an experience for these people, we have to think about how are they going to fill the other 75% of their time, right? Like what are the other like activities and opportunities that we're going to have for them so that they feel like over the course of 2 full days, they really, really had a wonderful experience and can't wait to come back.
Yeah, so how do you think of those kind of extracurricular types of events? Like I know the location has changed across the Pacific Northwest, and there's like sometimes outdoor activities. How does like the Pacific Northwest itself shape the structure, and like what other types of elements do you think about when you're planning extracurricular things?
Even though we are located in the Pacific Northwest, like we have people joining us from all over the place. The numbers change year to year, but like let's just say 60% of folks are fairly local, but then that means 40% of people are coming from somewhere else, like New York, Europe, San Francisco, like all over the place. So it's really important to all of us. And I'm speaking for a lot of people, right? We put together like a really awesome organizing crew every year. So really it's just a question of like, hey folks, like what do we want to do this year to like show off like the Pacific Northwest or to show off Seattle? Like one year, like someone had the idea, there's a wonderful theater here in Seattle that used to be called Cinerama. It was like a passion project of Paul Allen, the Microsoft co-founder who sadly passed away a few years ago. It was just this. It was the best theater in Seattle. It was a single screen. Like if you wanted to go see a movie and you cared, like you wanted to see it at Cinerama. And someone was just like, we should just like rent out Cinerama and like screen something. And I was like, that's an amazing idea, right? Like anyone who's never been to Cinerama should go to Cinerama. So I don't know what year this was, maybe 2015 or 16, and I think we screened like whatever the James Bond movie was that came out that summer. But that's just like that. But it changes every year, right? Like I think like one year we took all of our speakers for a private tour of the KEXP studios. And so KEXP is this like world famous alternative rock radio station that happens to be like headquartered here in Seattle. And that was not my idea, right? Like someone else kind of came up with this idea, and we just thought that this is brilliant, and we just had to work to make it happen. I think one thing that like I'm proud of, and it's really important to me, is that like I think of myself, but I also think of Cascadia as like an API or a platform, right? Where it's just like we have some money, we have some resources, but like the platform is like totally inert and useless until people with ideas build on top of it, right? And that's just how I think about my role. It's kind of like, how can I connect like the resources of Cascadia to these people that have these like brilliant ideas, whether it's for an extracurricular activity, or like there's this awesome guy who's been running pickleball the last few years as an outdoor activity. It's just like it changes every year, and it changes based on on how the community changes. It changes based on who our organizers and our volunteers are. I guess the only thing that doesn't change is the regionality of the Pacific Northwest, and just sort of like the laser focus on like creating delightful experiences for like our attendees and our speakers.
Well, speaking of a delightful experience for attendees, karaoke. That's become like a closing fixture of Cascadia. So like, how did that become part of the identity, and like, why do you keep doing it every year?
I wish I could tell you. Like I don't remember. I just don't remember whose idea it was. Right. I feel like karaoke's been around forever. I'm sorry. Like I do sort of. Sorry, it's hazy. Right. But once upon a time, I don't know if they still exist. There was a karaoke bar down in Portland whose name I can't remember, but the people who ran the karaoke bar were also software engineers. And they built their own custom karaoke API. Um, and I'm not even kidding. They built their own custom karaoke software and karaoke API. And it was and they actually and they published documentation. They had docs, they had API docs, they had everything. And I just remember like we rented out their karaoke bar to host our closing party when we were in Portland, which was 2014. And it was hilarious. And like we actually we actually made it easy for attendees to like sign up and get API keys, because normally when you go to karaoke, like there's like some crappy app that you're using, but we had people like opening up their MacBook Pros and like connecting to the API and like using it to like schedule songs, and people started getting into queue wars where like they were like programmatically bumping their song to the top of the queue, and then there was like program against program trying to see who was going to sing next. So I think like, hey, anyone who's listening who remembers the truth, feel free to correct me on Twitter, CRTR0. Tell me I'm wrong. I think that was like the origin story for karaoke, and and that's the thing. That's the thing about culture and about like tradition. Like it has to start somewhere, but then like once it starts, it just sort of there's this inertia to it. So then we just sort of had karaoke ever since. And then this past year, and I'm sorry you all missed it. I think arguably the most popular karaoke bar here in Seattle is called Rockbox. And we actually like rented the whole thing out. So we did a buyout of Rockbox, which was amazing because they've got like a dozen rooms, right? So not everybody wants to sing karaoke in front of like 60 people they don't know. Some people want to kind of grab like their three best friends and go into a small private room and kind of have a little bit of privacy. But yeah, we did that this past year. It remains to be seen how we're going to top that next year, but we'll figure out a way.
That's cool to hear a little bit of the history as you remember it. And that is some of the cool stuff about building with the community is it changes and morphs and everyone kind of gets to have their part in it.
Well, and one thing I'd love to leave people with like this idea, and maybe in some ways this is like the most important idea I'm sharing. People forget that developers are people. Like I mean, I really mean that. And I don't mean that in terms of like people who put on tech conferences. I think people who run companies forget that, right? You sort of think like a developer is just like this, like, organism that like reads developer docs and like writes code or something, right? It turns out that developers are just people. And if you remember that, you will remember that like you can't just give them good technical talks and you can't just give them pragmatic programming workshops. Like you have to feed their soul in like all of the other ways that humans need to have their souls fed, right? So like, sure, karaoke has like a fun origin story, and it's cool that like it's kind of associated with our conference instead of like all conferences. But like the reason it's durable is because we're just people, and people want to have fun. And if you sort of forget that, if you forget that developers are people and you forget that people want to have fun, you'll create a nice event and maybe an okay event, but I don't think you'll create an event that people care about.
Yeah, what a special way to wrap a lot of that up. And I don't know if you're listening, hopefully you can get the sense of just how community focused and people focused Cascadia is. It's the opposite of whatever. If you've been to a conference that's about a company, if you've been to a conference that's primarily about selling you stuff, like this is about the people, and you get that from the top down. And so, Carter, I really appreciate you wrapping that up in that kind of way. Is there anything else that you feel like would be special to share with the listeners, or maybe just about like how to connect with you or Cascadia if people are interested in coming?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you can find me on Twitter, CRTR0. You can find Cascadia JS on like all the things, Twitter, Blue Sky, just like search for Cascadia JS. You can go to cascadiajs.com. We're looking ahead to next year. It's kind of funny, like you work so hard. It takes about 6 months end to end to sort of put on Cascadia. And then in the immediate aftermath, you truly don't want to think about Cascadia because it's such a Herculean task, right? But like, once you kind of like give yourself a month or two to sort of decompress, like it's crazy. Like like you've got no choice. Like you've got to start thinking about next year, like, and all the things, all the things that you want to keep the same, but like, this is where you start to think about all the things that you want to improve on, that you want to make better. You're kind of catching me in my like recovering from this past year's event. But I assure you, once August, September rolls around, like we'll be in full blown 2027 mode, and we'd love for people to join us. It's a really wonderful event. We have so many like just ultra like loyal, passionate people that come year after year, and I've heard it referred to as like almost like a reunion, like a family reunion or a class reunion. Just like it's like the one time of a year when you can guarantee that you're going to run into this person you really enjoy, but you don't live nearby. But we want more people to join us. It's when you create something special, it doesn't count unless you can share it with someone. We want to share Cascadia with more people.
Well, Carter, thank you so much for joining us. We loved attending Cascadia, but we love talking about it as well, and really appreciate all the time and effort and just the advice that you've given us so far. So thank you for joining us on Building Forward.
Awesome, no worries, and I can't wait to see y'all at Forward. So good luck, and can't wait to see it.